The EAV model, entities, attributes, variables, is extremely important to understand when it comes to understanding semantics. If you've ever done programmatic SEO, then you already know how this model or how this concept works. We are going to cover several things, essentially how the EAV model works, why it is important to understand and to apply in semantic keyword research, and not only that, but also in the way that you consider queries, content, topical clusters, content briefs even. Definitely important concept to grasp. And also the practical tools and the ways to incorporate this into keyword research. So let's first talk about what are entities and how are entities different from keywords, because this is the most hot topic when it comes to entities, and especially for people that are beginners and are just trying to grasp the concept. So entities are distinct and well-defined concepts like people, places, things, or ideas. So Barack Obama is a person, for instance. The Louvre is a place and the smartphone is a thing. But actually, if we add a component here, the iPhone would be a product. So different types of concepts that exist in the real world. And we also have the classifications of how these concepts are actually defined in the real world as well. So let's contrast entities against how SEOs traditionally consider keywords and find the differences. Keywords essentially represent phrases or specific words that hold some value from an SEO perspective, while entities reflect things that actually exist in the real world. Sometimes these two things can overlap in the context of keyword research, but not always. From the context of a user typing in a search query into a search engine like Google, the query is composed of keywords of varying importance. Some of those keywords might also be entities. Let's look at some examples. The search query, for instance, could be shop online Nike, Jordan, Air Force One. And the keywords that we have, essentially all of the terms within that query are shop, online, Nike, Jordan, Air Force One. When we take any of these terms, essentially at face value, and if we are trying to do some rule-based classification, we might say that shop relates to transactional intent, and that's why it has value for us SEOs. Online relates to them wanting to complete the purchase on a web-related medium, so they want to navigate to the store or the website. Nike means that it is a branded keyword, so they're doing a branded search. And Jordan Air Force One means that it's a product research, so they're very, very highly transactional, very high intent keywords, so very important for the brand. But if we don't look at the keywords and we don't look at the SEO importance that they may hold, we are going to see that they are actually containing three entities: Nike, which is an organization type, Air Force One, which is a product, and Michael Jordan, which is a person that is only referred to Jordan. You can look at the other example on the screen here, which is Beginner Guide to SEO Research. But imagine if they also had a YouTube video in the query as well. They would also be indicating the medium that they would prefer or the platform that they would prefer to watch this video guide in, essentially. Again, we do have two separate ways to look at queries. One is the SEO importance type of way, where we analyze queries based on the different ways that those terms could represent some type of importance when it comes to the brand, the revenue, the traffic to the website. And then we also have the entity way, which is related to semantics, and that relates to concepts, things, and topics that exist in the real world that the user is interested in. Of course, we should blend both of these perspectives as SEOs, because we are, at the end of the day, commissioned to increase traffic, increase revenue as a result of that traffic. So we should keep both perspectives in mind. But at the end of the day, for the user, and subsequently for Google as well, the semantic point of view is more important. Let's talk about the EAV model. Each entity has attributes, and each attribute will have different variables. That's essentially what the EAV model is. Entity attributes are characteristics or properties of entities. So if we consider the dog being an entity, the attribute could be things like color, and another attribute could be things like the breed of the dog. These are properties of the main entity that are used to better describe the particular entity that it is. Entity variables represent the specific values of entity attributes. So again, if we look at the dog as an entity and we take the breed as the attribute that we would like to look into, you could have different variables within that, like Labrador being one, Husky being another, and so on. So if you are looking into categorizing all of that, if your main core entity or one of your core entities on your website is a dog, then what you would look into doing would be collecting all of the different types of attributes that could be described or are important for web content related to that entity. And then also looking into all of the different variables for each of those attributes that could be used or exist in the real world, regardless whether they exist as web content or not. This is not the point of the exercise. The point is to actually map everything that exists in the real world to that mapping that you have here. Here's how you might go about selecting entities, attributes, and variables to add to your keyword universe. So if you take the entity influencer, we have several different attributes from the get-go. Where are they? Their location, what niche are they creating content in, what is the name? Based on all of this, once you have the different attributes in, you can start collecting different variables for those attributes. So for instance, for the location, you can have different locations for your target market, whether that's Europe or Asia or the US and so on. For the niche, you might scrape all of the niches on YouTube or TikTok, or all of the top 100 or 1000 niches that are related to the product that you're trying to sell. For you can have different names just to kind of have an identifier. It's very important to also have in your database whether you have a finite or an infinite number of entries for the variables. For instance, for the location, yes, absolutely, we do have a number of unique cities, so you do have a finite location, but you could also have a cutoff point. You're only looking at influencers that are living in cities with more than 1,000 people residents, or maybe influencers that have more than 1,000 followers on TikTok or YouTube. And you could do the same for the other attributes that you have in this example database. But as you will see, the name attribute is not actually finite. It is infinite. You could have infinite number of names for describing influencers. So a couple of important points to consider. The search volume is not really a relevant indicator of potential whenever you are looking at EAV model based keywords. Here, the important thing is business purpose and brand relevance of the given combinations in a search engine landscape. And here is where we're coming back to what I mentioned a while ago about keeping both of those aspects, like the importance when it comes to the brand, the business, and SEO, and also the real world concept. So let's look at an example from the imaginary database that we are discussing. You could have influencers named Anna, and that is related to the attribute that is titled the name, which is a way to describe the influencer. There are infinite number of variable entries, and besides scalability issues with such a query, because you have infinite names that you could potentially generate this query with, the search volume is negligible, which, like we mentioned, is not really something that should deter us at this stage. But a page like this and a query like this is very unlikely to exist because it doesn't really have a real utility. There's no real reason to clutter the web page with a list of influencers that are named Anna, right? But if you look at marital status, for example, and a query potentially that could address this could be influencers that are married with kids. And that's related to the attribute marital status. It does have a finite amount of entries. And especially if you add an additional attribute within the beauty niche or within the pet niche or whatever. So despite you still having a very low search volume for this type of query, there is a business purpose for this, as having a list like this might be useful for businesses that are trying to do influencer marketing for home goods or children brands, and they are looking to actually connect with the audience of those influencers. So despite you having a very niche audience and a query like this might have almost negligible search volume, a list on this topic might be useful for those searching for it. So it does have an SEO value if you look at it from that point of view. Another scenario when search volume might not be a good indicator of traffic potential is if you discover EAV combinations that no one has written about yet. An example of this will be Zapier's integration pages at the time that they were creating them, when they had like entity combined with integrations and another entity, and then combining different integration scenarios with one another. At the time when they were creating those, there wasn't really a lot of search volume, but as they were creating them and as they were building up their product around these pages, the business potential grew. So that's a kind of scenario where you wouldn't really need search volume in order to determine whether something has potential or not. So some entity attributes and their associated variables could be suitable for pursuing, but how effectively you pursue those would depend on scalability and organic traffic potential. Here, look at factors like your ability to produce original content on the topic, the number of variables that you're working with and whether there's a finite number of them, and also the interest towards this variable from a business or a curiosity standpoint. Because sometimes you might just be interested in a topic and that would mean traffic. And if the traffic is monetized via display ads, then that's also a suitable revenue to pursue. But otherwise, you would be looking to kind of convert that traffic. If you are doing keyword research for a business that only has conversions as their ability to produce revenue, then essentially looking at keywords and EAV combinations from that point of view of does it have the ability to produce revenue is very important. Why is it important to understand and apply this model in the content that you produce? Understanding entities, first of all, is essential to aligning your content with the way that modern search engines interpret queries and also the way that users think about search. Google uses entities in many of its ranking systems to interpret content and evaluate its relevance, to prioritize pages that comprehensively address the user query context. It also uses entities in its knowledge graph to deliver richer, more personalized and contextualized search results, as both of these are used to improve the recommendations for search results and SERP features that are shown to users. What are the benefits of actually incorporating this model? The first thing is actually understanding the different ways that people refer to concepts. Understanding entities would also mean understanding the relationships between them and also how they relate to different events in the knowledge graph. So Barack Obama, for instance, could be referred as Barack Obama. It could be also former president of the United States. It could also be the 44th US president. If you identify entity attributes that people commonly search for and their most popular variants, that could indicate potential content and site structures that you could immediately implement on your website as well. For instance, when referring to dog food, people might often search for specific types like kibble or canned, in which case, for the entity dog food, an attribute would be food type with the variables kibble and canned, and then other variables as well. You can detect information gaps using the EAV model that you can address to create more comprehensive content. If you identify that commonly web content discusses kibble and canned dog food, but doesn't really discuss raw, semi-moist, or chew dog food, you might research and write about these food types, enriching the information landscape and setting your content apart from competitor content. You can improve the contextual relevance of your content, enhancing user intent alignment. So you can understand entities, attributes, and variables. And understanding them also means you now know how they relate to topics. And that is like becoming a digital salesperson or advisor. I love very frequently use this kind of analogy in my training whenever it relates to entities and topics and essentially understanding entity attribute variables, because I think it's a great way to think about what your website should be doing in the digital landscape. If you have ever purchased a car or are kind of in the process of purchasing one, you would know that there is a ton of decisions that you would need to make. Some of these might be related to an attribute of the car, which is external, like the paint type, the paint color. Others might be related to the engine, internal systems. Others might be related to the interior of the car, the material that will be used for the seating, and so on. Beyond that universe of the entity itself, the product entity, there's also decisions that are related to financing the car, doing a financial calculation, how much you can afford, applying for a loan, or the benefits and limitations of purchasing cash. There is a ton of decisions to make. Some of these are related directly to the entity. Others are related to the process of purchasing the entity or acquiring it. Within this purchasing journey, which is very complex, very long, very emotionally investing for a lot of people that undertake this journey, imagine your website becoming a digital salesperson. And if you've ever been to a car dealership, you would know that the salesperson would actually have information on all of the different types of decisions that you would need to take that are related to the main purchasing decision on that topic. You would know how experienced and how maneuvering they are with presenting the right type of information at the right stage. Essentially, your website should become that digital salesperson that presents the appropriate information at the appropriate stage in a way that is digestible and in a way that is related to the stage where the person is. If you're working for a brand that is selling such a high investment product and making such an emotional purchase, you would also need to partner and identify the opportunities to be featured in third-party websites as well. That's why you have full marketing mix. The aim essentially with this process is discovering the exact search queries that your target customers search for on search engine like Google when they look for products, services, information, or anything related to whatever they are trying to accomplish as a goal. But not only that, but to also understand the user search journey and the information landscape that your website will inhabit so that you can plan how to show authority and expertise in it, whether it's on your own site or whether you are featured on third-party websites. And a great example of how Google does that with systems like MUM, for instance, is to actually map the information from the different stages of the user journey via the knowledge graph and the different topics, micro decisions, and queries, and actually create a complete user journey for the person that wants to go on a hike, for this example. Google is also bringing that to multimodal search as well. We're seeing that with Google Lens and also with the introduction of Gemini and models like this. The type of interactions that we will be seeing in the next few years would be a lot more related to the entity attribute variable model than ever before. So let's talk about how to practically implement the EAV model in your keyword research. We're going to go through one example, and this is just an example of how you might go about researching for this. Let's imagine we are starting a semantic keyword research project for a new website in the pet niche. What we know that this website is a business model that is based on product sales for some pet products that they have, and also for display ads. So our goals then translate to creating resources about the products that the company will sell and to also increase organic traffic. So the step one would be to research the search landscape. I do have a checklist. You can check that out after the lesson. You compile a database of search terms, combine all of the files into one, tag the sources, and then you actually extract entities from those search terms. The process of extracting entities shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes, requires no coding skills. There's already a tutorial on doing this on the ML for SEO blog. To start extracting entities from your keyword list with the Google Natural Language API, you can just use the ML for SEO entity extraction template in Google Sheets if you're working with, say, less than 50,000 keywords. The process is simple. You create an API key, you paste the API key in the app script, run the script via the menu to extract the entities from the content, and you get entity data in seconds. That includes things like what the entity is, what type it is, what is the salience or importance of it, what is the sentiment score that the entity has been mentioned with, or otherwise the emotion, whether it's positive or negative at any time that this has been mentioned in, and what is the strength of that emotion, the sentiment magnitude. Also in the mentions column, you're also going to see different ways that this particular entity has been referred to throughout the document. And you also have a separate column for the metadata as well, which could indicate knowledge graph reference or Wikipedia URL. Another step would be to identify co-occurring terms for the entities. You can do this programmatically via applying an Ngram's custom formula, and you can also do this with Keyword to identify the most important semantically terms or term combinations, or otherwise keyword extraction and clustering based on fuzzy matching. The tutorial and code on doing this is already on the ML for SEO blog. What you get with this type of script is you can extract from documents the terms that are most important semantically, and you can cluster them via Ngrams. That could be bigrams, trigrams, or however many words that you decide. And the script is quite easy to use. You insert your keywords and you get the core term and the bigram that is extracted from that term as a very quick and easy way to cluster keywords together. The key here is to analyze bigrams or pairs of words, or trigrams, triplets, uncovering the most prevalent combinations of pairs of words plus the entity. That's what we would refer to as the pattern keywords. Spend some time to manually look for and identify patterns. So here's what a pattern could look like. It could be things like can dogs eat food? It could be things like brand dog food, like Chewy or Farmers or Victor, whatever, Royal Canin, whatever it may be. It could be type of training behavioral issue to solve dog training, like service dog training or obedience dog training or whatever else. It could be things like canine, agility, reactive, at home, elite. The list can go on. You can actually go through like a manual keyword research exercise and SEMrush to do this, but you can also do this by programmatically incorporating a variable, an ngram, and the entity that you are doing research for. Dog training location focused on service listings with the dog training keyword cluster is another example. And that could include things like dog training in Spain or UK, or in a particular state, or in a particular city. It could be things like dog training accessory within the dog training keyword cluster. And the examples of this would include things like dog training whistle or clicker or collar, which is very much related to products and e-commerce websites. It could be type of dog park in location from the dog park cluster. It could be dog walking in location for a service-based business. It could be dog grooming in location, or dog grooming for the type of dog or a type of behavioral issue. So you can go very, very niche if you combine different attributes of the same entity with different engrams and patterns. It could also be best dog thing or product for creating listicle or comparison content for accessories, food, and other entities. Examples of this could include best dog shampoo, best dog food, best dog dry food, clickers, and so on. Are you noticing something here? In the last example that I mentioned, it could be best dog food, it could be best dog dry food, or best dog food for pit bulls, or canned food, and so on. So essentially here, what you're seeing is that you have a single variant and a multi-variant patterned keyword. So the single variant is related to dog breed or type of dog food, but you could also combine two of them. The multi-variant is combining, for instance, the best type of dog food as the attribute, and then for the dog breed, which is another attribute. After you have gone through the process of identifying all of this, you will have a prioritized list, and you will create a list of all the patterns of entity-related terms. You will identify query EAV patterns that can be super useful for starting to think about templated content and content patterns. So here, going with the same example, you might have entity, which is dog food, attribute, dog breed, and then the variable could be Labrador, Poodle, French Bulldog, and so on. You could have another attribute of the same entity, which is food type, and that could be kibble, canned, raw, homemade, and so on. And you could have a third attribute like the dog need, whether it is gaining weight, losing weight, sensitive skin, diabetes, and so on. Let's just take these three as an example. You have one entity, which is the core product of an imaginary website. You have 356 dog breeds, you have 8 food types that you have selected, and you have 8 dog needs, for instance. You can programmatically map out all entity attribute variable combinations into your final target queries using a single variant combination or a multi-variant combination. Of course, you can do this in Python. Here are just some examples of how you can do this in Google Sheets as well. What this will give you, if you just go with these 4 on the screen, is about 26,000 possible keyword variations. Of course, validation will be needed. It's not recommended to just spam out and create pages after the stage. It may look tempting to say that you have discovered a super niche programmatic SEO opportunity. But of course, differentiation is key. Otherwise, you will both be cannibalizing and duplicating content that exists on other places on the web. And quality control is paramount to create good quality and not just thin pages, to actually focus on pages that are of value to users. And I would suggest to use a service like Data for SEO to run those keywords through a search volume checker and to do a SERP analysis to actually see what the actual competitiveness is for those terms, to determine the business relevance as well, and to determine the competitiveness from an SEO standpoint. This was the process of actually uncovering entity attribute variable combinations. This is a process that you can apply to whatever niche you're researching, regardless of the type of project that you will be working on content-wise, whether it is programmatic SEO or whether it is traditional content programs. And this process can be applied not only for optimizing for Google search, but also for YouTube or TikTok or whatever. The goal here essentially is for you to do this exercise to actually open up the way that you consider a certain topic, and to not just look at keywords, but to actually go beyond that and to look at the patterns that someone could be using to search for something, and then to tie that pattern with the thing that exists in the real world, the different aspects of that thing that could be important to users, and the different ways that that thing and those attributes could exist in the real world. These are essentially the entity, the attributes, and the variables. When you tie those with patterns, that's where the magic happens when it comes to identifying new terms that you might have not considered. If you have a niche where you have a lot of information that has not yet been brought to the web. This can be a gold mine when it comes to introducing new entity attribute variable combinations and the content related to them. You could become a source of original information as a result of that. Let's conclude what we learned. Entities are immensely important for semantic keyword research. Understanding entity structures and the EAV model and how to tie these together with search intent and business value is very much the key to building a very good core to your semantic keyword universe. When building your keyword universe, identify entities, identify attributes and variables based on the service and the product proximity. Extrapolate relative interest for possible EAV combinations and prioritize based on maximum value for the user and based on the page quality that you can create based on your resources. Consider your ability to produce quality content and the need for this content to exist. Don't just spam because you have a ton of different combinations that you have just added to your keyword universe. And overcome your reliance on search volume and consider user needs, search intent, and search context. The process of identifying entities, variables, and attributes can be done both programmatically and manually. We have demonstrated how both of these processes can work in this lesson, both as a manual exercise, but also as an assisted programmatic exercise. And also you can do this fully automated with Python scripts and so on. But I would always advocate to spend some time with the data and to understand the terms that people are using to actually see those patterns yourself. I want to thank you as usual for watching and hopefully have some great ideas on how to actually identify entities, but not only that, tie those entities with attributes and variables and patterns of keywords that people might enter in Google search to create incredible possibilities for the keywords that you might want to pursue with your business or brand online.